Last time we were talking about what was happening with the Greeks. We talked about Homer, and we talked about the writings of Homer. I'm not going to go back over that, but we're going to move on to another period. This is called the Archaic period of Greek history. Archaic period. Remember, we had the Dark Ages, the Dorian period. Now, a new period, 750 roughly to 500. This Archaic period, we see the rise of Greek cities. These are called a polis, the rise of the polis. And so that should not be unfamiliar to us because we have the name polis, right? Maybe you've heard of Minneapolis, Indianapolis, Annapolis, and so forth. The word polis in Greek means city, but it actually means more than just a city. It means a city-state. So it includes the city and the territory around the city. So the polis then becomes the way in which the Greek culture, government, everything is established. The center of culture and commerce as well. At the heart of any Greek city, any polis, would be the agora, or the marketplace. This would be in the center of the city, and it'd be where people would go to do, well, all kinds of things. You needed to buy cloth or food or whatever, you would go to the polis. It was a place where you did shopping. If you needed to vote or somehow engage with the government or the court system, you would go to the agora because all of it would be located in that area. It was the center of the city. It was where all the big temples were. It was where the courts were. It's where the marketplaces were, and so forth. Okay? The agora. And also, if you just wanted to see people, maybe you just wanted to be where people were. Unlike me, you may like to be around people, and you just wanted to go and see what people were doing. This would be where you would go. Me, I would just stay at home. So we see in the Archaic period, 750 to 500 BC, the rise of the polis, polis meaning city. The center of it is the agora, the marketplace of the city itself. Now, the city-state, or polis, is controlled by the aristocracy. What do I mean when I say aristocracy? The aristocrats, but who are the aristocrats? What's that? The elites. Okay, well, really, yes, the wealthy. Aristocrats is based upon wealth. So if you think of rich people as being elite, then yes, they are the elites. Me, I just think of them as rich people. But yes, and notice the word here, however, because this word's going to show up. Notice at the end of this word, ocracy, the aristocracy rose to power and it leads to an oligarchy. What's an oligarchy? Okay, a small group, the rule of a few. Really, the word here is ocracy. Ocracy comes from the Greek word archon. Archon is the Greek word for leader or to rule. So what an aristocracy means, it's the rule of the rich who would run things, right? Okay? Then we have, for example, a monarchy. What's that? One. Mono. Mono means one. Monarchy is the rule of one, right? How about democracy? The rule of the people. So eventually what we're going to see here is that the aristocracy, then, the rule of the rich, leads to an oligarchy, the rule of a few. Okay. Now another thing that develops in the polis is the assembly of citizens. The assembly of the citizens is going to be a way for the citizens to actually have a voice in what's going on. Okay? So, you know, like we said, democracy, the rule of the demos, or the people, we don't really have democracy yet in Greece, but I suppose you could say the assembly of citizens will lead to that, gives a voice to more people. By the way, I feel compelled to tell you that citizenship in ancient Greece was very different than citizenship in the United States today. What does it take to be a citizen in the United States today? Got to be born here. That's a very low standard. A lot of countries do not have that standard, I can guarantee you, even today across the world. If you just happen to have been born in Germany or Spain or whatever, it would not mean you were a citizen of Spain. It would go with the citizenship of your parents, is the way most countries, if your parents are, say, Germans, and you were born in Spain, you are not Spanish, you are German, because your parents are German, all right? Here in the United States, though, if you're just born in the United States, you're a U.S. citizen. That's a fairly low standard, fairly easy standard to come by. Now, of course, there are other ways of obtaining it, but that is the way most people obtain their U.S. citizenship, is by just being born here. I say that because when I say here the assembly of the citizens, you might think that was just anybody. Anybody who was born in Greece or born in that city was a citizen. Not true. First of all, you'd have to be male. Women were not citizens, okay, in ancient Greece. Secondly, it would also be based upon wealth. So if you didn't have enough wealth, you would also not be a citizen. So just something to keep in mind. Colonization. This is another thing that's going to happen during this period. There's going to be a period of colonization. The Greeks are going to be growing. Their population is going to be growing. And they're going to be expanding. Yeah, let's put up here in the front. Where are they going to settle? Well, this map kind of shows us the areas here that are, whatever you want to call that color, yellowish gold colors. You can see around the Black Sea. You can see what today would be Libya in North Africa, a little bit in Egypt. You can certainly see this other area here, the southern part of Italy, Sicily, the area up here around France, Barcelona, and the south part of France. These are all places where the Greeks will colonize in the 7th century during this period, this archaic period. Okay? So this really is going to shape their history. And these are colonies. What that means is that what that will mean is that we'll see that, say, Athens will have certain colonies, Corinth will have certain colonies, and these colonies will be attached to that city. You might think of it like some people that sometimes have been called mother and daughter. It's a mother city of Corinth will have a daughter city. That's I don't know if people use that terminology anymore. But basically there is the main city, and then there's the colony city that's attached to that city. Okay? Well, along the Black Sea, in Egypt and the Near East, in Sicily, along the coast of Italy, especially southern part of Italy, the southern part of France, and down to the area of Barcelona. These were all areas that the Greeks colonized. Why did they do it? For different reasons, for resources, because of trade and overpopulation and food. I mean, that area around the Black Sea was known for fertile soil. You could grow a lot of wheat there. Remember we said that Greece had a lot of mountains. Therefore, it didn't have a lot of land that you could plant, very successfully plant wheat and stuff like that. So as your population grows, you need more food. if you can go to the areas around the Black Sea, then you can see that this would be a place which would bring a lot of food in. Also, fishing, trade, and it could be a place for open markets. In other words, what would happen is, let's say the colony was a colony of Athens, okay? That means that the goods from Athens would be sold in that colony city. Pottery, whatever other kind of goods they had. So that's a great thing for the people back in Athens. They had a whole new market to sell their stuff. And then they would sell their stuff there, and then maybe, let's say if it's up around the Black Sea, then they would get grain for that, and grain would come back to the city that way. Okay? Now, another side thing, or it really becomes an important thing, is that this spreads Greek culture to all these colonies. Greek language, Greek literature, Greek ideas. And so we see that especially in the eastern half of the Mediterranean, Greek ideas and culture becomes dominant. Even when the Romans end up taking over, people in this area still speak Greek for a lot of their business and so forth, not Latin. So let's say you're talking about the New Testament times. The New Testament is written in what language? Latin? What language is it written in originally? Greek. That's why it's written in Greek, because Greek was the common language of the people in the whole eastern part of the Mediterranean, and of course it was understood elsewhere. But that's why Greek is the language of the New Testament, for example, is because of the colonies of the Greeks. And then Alexander the Great later on, of course, will conquer even more of this area in the east. Well, here it is, just another map, just to clarify it, make it a little bit clearer. In this case, is this sort of pinkish color. We'll show you all the colonies of the Greeks. Okay, so you can see it here on the islands. You can see it down here in Spain, France, even in Egypt. You know, the one in Egypt, Necrotis, was a place where the Greeks, the Greeks were enamored with Egyptian art and all things Egyptian because they knew the Egyptians had a very ancient culture. So in fact, they kind of imitated Egyptian statues and things like that. And they wanted to have sort of souvenirs and things from Egypt. Well, what they did is they actually had a little colony here. It's not even showing up here. It's called Necrotis. And Necrotis was where they would make a lot of these souvenirs so they could basically say this was made in Egypt. It was actually made in a Greek colony. So, they would, I guess, like make little pyramids or whatever it is they were going to sell to people. And it could be, made in Egypt, but it's a Greek colony in Egypt. All right. Let's talk about the Olympics then. We'd already mentioned the Olympics and the importance of the Olympics. What was so important about the Olympics? What we already mentioned. To Greek culture. Yeah. Exactly, yeah. They started their calendar there in 776 BC. That was the very first Olympic Games. And you're right. It is important because all the other dates in Greek history get dated back to this one event, the first Olympic game. And the Olympic Games are every 4 years, right? Maybe you've forgotten that because now we have them every 2 years. We have a Winter Olympic and then we have a Summer Olympic, and they're each in every 4 years, but then they come every 2 years. It used to be they were all in the same year. I used to like that better. I guess I'm just a traditional. Yeah, we're going to have the Olympics. Let's do all the sports in 1 year. But then they started stretching it out instead of doing it in the beginning of this year and then the summer. Then they started to do it in the summer and the end of the year. And then they decided, hey, let's just make it a whole nother year away. So now this means you get to have the Olympic hype every 2 years. Well, of course, the ancient Olympic Games had no winter sports because they don't have winter. They don't really hardly ever see snow, maybe way up on a mountain. So it was just what we would call Summer Olympics, running, that sort of thing. But here are some of the events. You can see them on the sides of the Greek vessels. You know, they were decorated with the sporting events. Here's a foot race. And they had foot races of various lengths. We don't have time to go into all the things. Some of them were distance runs. Some of them were sprints. They also had chariot races and other kind of horse racing. They also had boxing, a kind of a boxing, not like our boxing, but it's sometimes sort of a boxing wrestling, almost like a kickboxing kind of thing is what they did. We don't have time to go into all the details, but they had a lot of different events. Okay. Well, it sets the calendars for the Greeks. That's what we said. Now, another thing that's going to start to happen at this time is that the Greeks will begin to see tyrants come into their government. Now, for us, when we use the word tyrant, it's always negative, right? So he's a tyrant. You know, the Romans had a word called dictator, and of course, that's very negative. It was not negative at this time. A tyrant was somebody who was called in for a short term to make decisions that needed, and basically, the tyrant was sort of seen as a hero who's going to save the city or whatever in this time of trouble. And then once the trouble's over, the tyrant steps down, and we go back to our normal kind of government. Why is that? Well, you know, for example, I'm not wishing anything upon us, but let's say we had a crisis here on campus or in this building. Somebody said somebody's trying to get us or trying to attack us. Do you think our best course of action would be to divide into small groups and discuss it? I don't think so. Do you think we should form a committee, the committee on what to do now that we're under attack? No. That's inefficient. That's not going to work. And by the time you make any decision, it's too late. You see, it's a crisis. It's an emergency. So in an emergency, you really need one person to take charge. And say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to turn out the lights. We're going to barricade the doors. We're going to be quiet. We're going to hide under the desk. Whatever we're going to do, we make our plan. And we don't really have, well, you know, I really think we should do this or that. No, we don't have time for that kind of thing. Okay, we need to make a decision. Now, maybe it won't be the exactly right decision. But making no decision is probably even worse. All right, so that's really what a tyrant is. You call a tyrant in when you know you've got a real problem. And when committees and small groups and taking a vote is not an efficient way to handle an emergency. Okay? This is why if you ever join the military, I don't know if anybody in here is in the military or been in the military, but, you know, if you're in the military and you get ready to go into battle, you don't have all the guys take a vote. What do you think we should do? Think we ought to stay here in the barracks? You think we ought to go eat lunch? You think we ought to get our weapons and go out and go into battle? No, you don't take a vote. You have a commander, you have a general, you have a captain, whoever it is, and you say, this is what we're going to do. We have our orders, and these are our orders, and we're going to go do it. Because, well, that's a decision that's been made. Now, you may not like the decision, but you have to go along with it, because in a short term, it's probably your best bet. All right? So that's what I mean by a tyrant. The tyrants and the aristocrats begin to take control. At first, of course, it's only supposed to be for an emergency, but you can imagine somebody might extend the emergency so they can stay in power. See how that might happen? I want to keep the power, so I keep the emergency around. Well, I want to talk about two cities now that sort of epitomize ancient Greece, certainly ancient Greece at this period. And I know you've heard about them. One is called Sparta, and the other one's called Athens. So again, this is just going to be a brief introduction to what Spartans were like, what Athenians were like. Okay? Sparta is located down in the Peloponnesus. It's actually kind of tough to get there. I've only been to Sparta once. And I've never taken a group there. In fact, most tourist groups do not go to Sparta, even though it's a famous city. Why? Well, like I said, it's hard to get there. It takes a long time. You're going by, say, a bus or something. You got to climb up the mountains and come back down. And then once you get there, there's not a whole lot to see. So, you take maybe 4 or 5 hours to get there, not a lot to see, and then take 4 or 5 hours to get back out of there. So consequently, Sparta is not a big tourist attraction. You can see the mountains that are around it are pretty formidable. This picture in the lower left. The most famous Spartan, of course, is this guy in a statue here, Lycurgus. Now, something to keep in mind about the Spartans, of course, you probably know them from the movie The 300 or something like that, right? They're great warriors. They were great warriors. Why were they such great warriors? What you have to know is that the Spartans controlled the area around them, the land of Messenia. They did that by basically having serfs, or what were called helots. These are just a step above slaves. These guys were assigned, they were forced really to be tied to the land and to do all the agricultural work. So if the Spartans are such great warriors, who's doing all the farm work? It's these guys. It's these guys. Well, the Messenians then are forced into serfdom. They're forced to work in the fields. They're forced to basically be the servants of the Spartans. And that allows then the Spartans to focus all their attention on preparing for battle. In fact, they have to, because these serfs outnumbered them. They had to be great military, great warriors, or they could not have ever, subdued the people. So that was a constant thing. And really, by the time you get to 600 BC, it's Lycurgus, the guy whose statue is up there, who transforms Sparta into a military state. And that's the Sparta that becomes famous, of great warriors. In fact, every Spartan male is a soldier. Every Spartan male is trained as a soldier, trained as one that would fight, one that would go into battle. Here's where Sparta is located. You can see all the mountains around it and how far south it is from, say, Corinth. Athens is over here, way over here. By the way, the Spartans were very controlled. Their lives were very regimented and controlled. In fact, a Spartan family, let's say you were a Spartan and you and your spouse had a child. We're used to in the United States that if you have a child, that child is basically your child, right? You get to make decisions, what happens, what clothes they wear, what they're going to do, that kind of stuff. I guess within the limits, but Not so in Spartan society. In Spartan society, as soon as your child is born, within just a few days, you have to bring your child before a board, before a council. They would decide if your child even gets to live. The Spartans regimented life. They didn't need as many women as they did men. So if they say, we got enough girl babies, your daughter's not going to live. You would be ordered to take your daughter up into the mountains and set her down and walk away. That's called infanticide. It's called abandonment. And there's one thing about human children, they are totally dependent. And they're totally dependent for a long time. Some people would say about 30 years. That was a joke. But you get the idea. If you walk away from that child, it will not live. That's how they control the population. Infanticide. Also, if we have a child that appears to not be physically sound, Can I get you to put the phones away, please? I hear a lot of buzzing. I see a lot of tapping back here and staring at the phones. Let's at least try to pay attention. We're only in here a little over an hour, twice a week. Okay, thank you. But for example, if your child looked like it had something wrong with its arm or its leg or something else, if they looked at your child and they said, your child does not appear to be fit, your child would be exposed. It was not your choice. This board, this council would decide. Then let's say you had a son. Your son would live with you to about the age of 6 or 7. Then again, your child would be turned over to the government, if you want to look at it that way, and would be raised in a barracks with other boys in a military style, and would begin to be trained to be a soldier even at the age of 6 or 7, separated from mother and father. So some people idealize the Spartans. They think they're great and so forth. I don't think if they know the whole picture, maybe they wouldn't necessarily want to live in Sparta, right? And then they're trained as warriors. And they had a minimum education because a soldier does not need, to know a lot of philosophy and all that, music and all that kind of stuff. They need to know how to fight. At the age of 20, they joined the military officially. Before that, they are not a Spartan soldier. They're too young. They're being trained as a Spartan soldier. They're learning the techniques, but they are not a soldier yet. At 20, they are. They're still not a man. What does it take to be a Spartan man? You got to be older than 20. You got to be 30 at least. At the age of 30, then you're a full citizen. You're considered a man, and that is the first time you can even think about getting married, having a wife, having children. And by the way, when you have your child, you're going to take it before a board. The board will decide if it lives or not. And your son, if you have a son, will be turned over at the age of 6 or 7 to go through the same thing that you did. If you have a daughter, the daughter is trained, again, with some domestic skills, but also very physically strong. It was the job of the Spartan woman to have Spartan soldiers. It was the job of a Spartan male to be a Spartan soldier. That's the main thing you got to remember. Everything's about being a soldier. So if you're a woman, if you're a mother, you're not a mother coddling a baby. No, you are a mother who is giving birth to a future soldier, and you want your soldier to fight hard. In fact, they had a ceremony when you joined the military. You were given a shield. A metal shield would be presented to you in a ceremony indicating you are now a Spartan soldier. You know who presented you with the shield? Your mother. You know what your mother said to you? She said, when you come back from battle, you're either come back carrying this shield or being carried on this shield. In other words, you come back dead, your comrades will carry you back on this shield. They'll use it as a way to carry you. Or you come back holding the shield. There's no other options. What does that mean? You don't run from battle. The biggest dishonor a Spartan soldier could have would be to come back at the end of a battle and not have his shield. Because guess what? If you're running, you don't need a shield. Shield's just going to weight you down. That's going to be the first thing you get rid of. Because, it's about 20-some pounds. Throw that down and just start running. If you show up without your shield, you're considered to be a coward. And that's actually worse than being dead in Spartan culture. Well, it was a very simple life, a very rigid life. If somebody said, you know, that they were living a Spartan life, I don't know what you would think that is, but what that really means is you would live in a small barracks-like quarters that had no artwork and nothing pretty or fancy in it. You'd have a simple bed, you would eat simple food, and you would get up early and train, and you would go into training and battle all day. In fact, a lot of the Greek authors would write about Sparta. One of the things they would often mention was how terrible the food was. It's terrible food. Well, kept you alive, that's all you needed. You don't do things for pleasure, you do things for power. All right, there's Sparta. Now the Spartans were also xenophobic. Xenophobic. Phobic comes from the word phobos or phobia, which means fear, right? You know that one. Xeno or xeno means fear of what? Yeah, outsiders, foreigners, people who are different. In other words, if you weren't Spartan, you weren't anything. One of the mistakes they made when they told them the Persians, you know, the other Greek cities, said, hey, we need your help, come and help us fight. The Persians are coming. The Persians are a threat. Is they showed the Spartans a map and showed them how far away Persia was, and they said, well, we don't really care. That's so far away. You know, they're probably never going to get here. If they get here, then we'll deal with it. All right, let's contrast that then with Athens. Athens begins with a monarchy for their government. By the way, the Spartans had 2 kings. I don't know if I mentioned that, but the Spartans had 2 kings. So they could always be in check. Athens had 1 king, a monarchy. Then they got rid of the monarchy and they went to an oligarchy, the rule of a few. And then finally, tyrants begin to control things. So we'll look at a couple of these tyrants and what they did for the city, or some might say to the city. I don't know. Draco. Looking for names for your kids? Draco's a good one. Draco imposed very strict rules on the city of Athens. Very strict laws. In fact, we have an English word, you maybe never used it, it's called draconian. You ever heard of draconian? They might have a sentence like, the government imposed draconian measures to whatever, you know, to change the economy or something. That means harsh measures. Draco in 621 established very strict laws which favored landowners. Solon in 594 reformed some of those laws. One of the things that he did to try to change things in Athens is that he canceled debts and he canceled slavery, especially debt slavery. Now, if you're somebody that has a lot of debt, and somebody said, hey, you elect me president in 2020, I'm going to take away everybody's debt. You won't have any debt. I might get a lot of votes. Of course, people want to know how I'm going to do that. And I'll tell you, the people that aren't going to like it, anybody you owe money to. If I just say, you know what? You got that big Visa bill, you don't have it anymore. Government's not going to pay it, you're not going to pay it, it just doesn't exist. You got a student loan? Doesn't exist. You got a home mortgage? Doesn't exist. Now, if somebody found that out early, they'd go out and buy a bunch of stuff, right? But it's the people that loaned you the money that aren't going to like it. The credit card companies, the banks, the businesses would all suffer. Another thing he's going to do is inflate the value of coins. Do you think inflation could ever help you? Most people would say no. I mean, if we have inflation, that means the price of things goes up, right? What's that?
Unless you're the one selling the items.
Well, I think inflation helps the person who's in debt.
Yes.
Why? Let's say, for example, you came up to me 5 years ago and said, Dr. Weinman, I really need a loan. Could you loan me $1,000? And I said, okay, I'll be a nice guy and loan you $1,000. And you pay me back 10 years later $1,000. What's happened to me? I would say I lost money. He said, no, you didn't lose money. You gave me $1,000. I gave you back $1,000. We're even. But 10 years later, the $1,000 doesn't buy as much, does it? Because of inflation. So inflation actually helps the person who's paying the loan back, especially if we inflate the value of the coins. Because now we're even changing it. We're saying the $1,000 you're paying me back with are worth less. Not only does everything else cost more, but that $1,000 is worth less. It's a double whammy to the person that loans you the money. So how do they overcome that? Well, they charge you a lot of interest. And what they really like, I'll just tell you this, I don't know if any of you have credit cards, but if you do, beware. Because credit cards are the quickest way for you to have huge financial problems. Because, yeah, they will give you the loan. You can go out and buy whatever you want on that credit card, but then they're going to charge you usually 18 to 24% interest. And then when they send you the bill, they're going to send you a very low bill. You got $2,000 you owe them, just send us $20. That's fine. And guess what? Most of that's interest. You might pay them that minimum payment, and it's going to take you 15 or 20 years to pay them off, and you're going to be paying money every month. Well, they'd like it's for the rest of your life. And that's really what ends up happening. Well, anyway, beware of the credit card. This is what he does. He inflates the coins. He cancels a lot of debts. This is to get people who were in debt out of debt. He then controls imports and exports. He wants to make sure that the city of Athens comes out ahead. So he starts to kind of monkey around with what you can import and what you can export. He doesn't want you to export things like grain, because we need the grain for people to eat. So foodstuffs are limited. You can't export them. All right? Things like that. We can't go through all the details. But you get the idea. What he's trying to do is modify the laws to help out those who are in great debt. Now, he didn't go as far as this last one. He did not redistribute land. But by the way, he did not make many friends with the wealthy, because all of these things are hurting the wealthy. They're the ones who are having the loans canceled, that people owe them money and now they're not going to pay them. They're the ones that, are not able to import and export like they want. Now, the final step, of course, would have been even more radical. It would be say, okay, I'm going to take the land away from one group and just give it to another group. He didn't do that. Probably why he lived. But anyway, so this is the kind of stuff that's going on. Well, Pisistrata in 560 ruled harshly, and eventually this led to a rebellion in Athens against him and ushered in the time of Clisthenes. Now, Clisthenes gains power about 508 BC, and he redistricts the city. This is called gerrymandering. This is a good word for you to learn. Gerrymandering, with a G, means that you redraw the lines of districts and things like that in order to sort of change the outcome. It happens all the time. It's legal in the United States, by the way. And so this is why it's very important. For example, we have a census coming up in 2020. That's going to change all the population things. There are going to be states who gain population. I mean, they've been gaining population, but the gain of that population will be recorded next year. I suspect a state like Florida is growing, whereas a state like Ohio or something like that is probably declining. So what that means is, for us in the U.S., you get House of Representatives in the House of Representatives based upon population. So if your population declines, as it is in some states in the Midwest, let's say, you will actually lose a seat in the House of Representatives. That means that all those House of Representative districts will have to be redrawn. And if you're in Florida, my guess is you're probably gaining people. You might gain a seat in the House of Representatives, which again means you're going to have to redraw the lines. So when you redraw those lines, they can be redrawn in a way that helps a certain political party. And who gets to decide that? It's basically whoever controls who's the governor and who is in control of the house, the state house. Will draw those lines. Well, anyway, that's gerrymandering. Now, he does it to mix things up because people were sort of divided by families, by extended families, and he wanted to mix that up, and so he redid it that way. Another thing that Clistheny is going to do is introduces ostracism. Anybody know what ostracism is? Ostracize, you isolate. You know, it actually comes from a Greek word. The Greek word is ostrakon. And ostrakon, that's singular, or ostraka is plural. What is that? Well, you know, when you want to write a note to somebody, of course, now you just text them, I guess, right? You don't write much on paper anymore. Maybe a little bit. But if you wanted to leave a note for somebody, like your mother or something, at your house, or your roommate, you would grab a piece of paper, maybe even a little scrap, maybe even like the back of an envelope or something, and you'd write a note on it and you'd leave it for them to find it, like put it on the pillow, their bed, or someplace you know they're going to see it, right? In ancient Greece, they didn't have paper like that. They didn't have scrap paper. So how did they write notes? How did they write things? They would often write on pottery. If we have a bowl here, and I happen to drop it on the ground and it breaks into several pieces, I just don't throw all that away. I keep those pieces, and then on those pieces I can actually write on it. When I write on a piece of pottery that's been broken like that, that's called an ostrakon. Ostrakon is then a piece of pottery with writing on it as a secondary use. That's also how they would vote, by the way. Instead of using a paper ballot, they would use a ceramic ballot. They would use a piece of pottery, and they would write the name of the person on there that they wanted to vote for. In this case, the practice of ostracism was the practice of being, they don't have that program still where they have people on an island and they vote them off the island. Is that still around? Is it? Still? Really? Nobody's tired of that yet? Okay. Yeah, so what is it called now? Survivor. It's still around. Okay, so on Survivor, you get to vote people off the island, right? Every once in a while. I don't really watch it, so I don't know. But I know every once in a while you'll have a council or whatever they call it, and then you'll vote somebody off. Okay, we're going to vote Fred off, and then Fred got 8 votes, so he's out. That's basically what ostracism is. You vote somebody not off the island, but out of the city. For 10 years, you can't come back. So it's an unpopularity contest or vote. And whoever gets the most votes is kicked out for 10 years. It's based off being unpopular. I mean, you're not sending a guy on a 10-year vacation. You're kicking him out of the city. And so they would do that by writing it on a piece of pottery. And then they would pass around like a jar, and you would put the pottery in the jar, and then they would pull the pottery out of the jar, and they would read the names. Fred, Sam, Joe, right? And then they would pile them up and say, okay, Fred got 20 votes. He got the most votes, he's out. Okay? So that's ostracism. Ostracism. It's an unpopularity contest where you get ostracized or kicked out. Now, this was normally, by the way, somebody who was well known, like a politician. Let's say you don't want that politician around anymore, you don't want that guy around anymore. You take a vote, you kick him out for 10 years. In fact, they have found in Athens, in a museum there, if you go in and look, you'll find they have these ostraca there with the names on it. And what you'll notice is the handwriting, the writing on it is the same on a lot of them. So what's that telling you? That's telling you that somebody is writing those out ahead of time on a piece of pottery and just handing it to you, and then you drop it in. Anyway. Fixing the election. That's been around. Monkeying with an election's been around thousands of years, right? It's nothing new. All right. Clisthenes is often credited with starting democracy, demos, or the rule of the people. Some argue maybe he didn't actually invent it, but he certainly did promote it. And he used to be called the father of democracy. I don't think anybody likes to call him that these days. All right? I'm going to move to our next topic.